Welcome to Tales from the Veil. Step into a world woven from the darkest threads of folklore, myth, and whispered legends. Each story you hear is an awakening, a new chapter in a world that lives just beyond our own in the shadows. For longer than the oldest oaks have been acorns, the hollow has been hers. She is a myth whispered on the wind, a devil cat of the Ozarks, a creature of primal power whose howl can stop a man's heart. But now her home is desecrated. A gang of werewolves on loud machines have claimed her quarry, calling themselves the Howler's MC. They answered her territorial call not with fear, but with mockery. They thought it was a game. They are about to learn the difference between playing monster and provoking one.
The old hollow was hers. It had belonged to her kind for longer than the oldest oaks had been acorns, a secret fold in the Ozark hills carved by water and time. In the hushed tales of the local populace, her kind were known as devil cats, a name born from terrified glimpses of a panther-like shadow with dark, sweeping horns. In truth, they were the true Ozark Howlers. She was not a creature of werewolf curse or fey glamour, but something more primal, rooted in the very stone and soil of the mountains. Her power was in stealth. She was scentless, a ghost to the keenest noses. Her night vision turned the moonless dark into a silvered landscape, and her howl was a weapon of pure terror, a sound that could make a man's heart stop in his chest. For moving among the mundane, she wore a human form, a lithe, agile woman with long dark hair and watchful eyes, always cloaked in shades of night. And for the rare moments when subtlety failed, she held a third form in reserve, a bipedal hybrid of rage and shadow, a cat-like nightmare whose claws could fell a tree with a single swipe. For the past few months, her home had been desecrated. A motorcycle gang had roared into the abandoned limestone quarry at the heart of her domain, their engines a constant, grinding profanity against the quiet of the woods. They called themselves the Howler's MC, a name she found deeply, personally insulting. Her first attempts to drive them off were rooted in tradition. From a high, wooded ridge overlooking their crude clubhouse, she unleashed the voice of her ancestors. It was a sound that didn't just carry on the wind, it tore through it, a terrifying, soul-shaking cry designed to inspire primal fear. Any natural creature would flee. Any human with a shred of sense would pack up and never look back. For a week, it seemed to work. The raucous noise from the quarry would die. Figures would scramble inside, dousing fires, their panic a sweet, satisfying scent on the air. Then, one night, the unthinkable happened. She let loose her howl, a perfect instrument of fear honed over a lifetime. And from the quarry below, an answer came. A crude, guttural, mocking imitation of her cry. She froze, disbelief warring with a surge of cold fury. They were answering her. They were mimicking her. She was a hunter, not a soldier. She knew better than to launch a reckless assault on a group their size. But this was an intolerable challenge. Night after night, the farce repeated. Her cry of ancestral power would be met with their jeering mockery. They had stolen her home, and now they were trying to steal her voice. Clad in her human form, a shadow among shadows, she crept to the edge of the quarry. The one they called President, a barrel-chested man named Jedediah Stone, stood in the firelight, a bottle in his hand. He threw his head back and let out another pathetic parody of her howl, and his followers roared with laughter and approval. A low growl vibrated in her chest, a sound too deep for her human throat. They thought this was a game. They believed they had chased off some local beast with their noise and bravado. They had no idea what kind of monster they were truly provoking, no concept of the power they were mocking. She would have to teach them the difference between a gang of men playing at being wolves and a true devil of the Ozark hills. The time for warnings was over. The hunt had begun. She flowed through the undergrowth, a ripple in the fabric of the night. The two sentries at the quarry entrance were confident. Their postures relaxed as they leaned against the stone gateposts. They were werewolves, she knew. She could feel the thrum of their tightly leashed power even from a distance. But they were arrogant, blinded by the security of their pack and the walls of their stolen home. They were listening for the howl from the ridgeline, not for the silence at their backs. Tonight, she wouldn't give them a warning cry. Tonight, she wore her second skin, the bipedal form of a warrior. She was a nightmare of sinew and shadow, her panther-like head and powerful legs moving with an unnatural grace. The horns were more pronounced in this shape, catching the faint starlight like polished obsidian. Her claws, long and sharp enough to score limestone, flexed with anticipation. She crept closer, her scentless nature her greatest shield. The guards were distracted, laughing at some crude joke. They believed themselves safe, apex predators in their own domain. It was time to shatter that illusion. With a speed that defied physics, she burst from the tree line. Before the first guard could even register the movement, she was on him. One hand, claws retracted into a punishing fist, struck him in the temple. He crumpled without a sound. The second guard spun around, his face a mask of shock, his own change beginning to ripple under his skin. He was too slow. Her clawed hand sliced through the air, not to kill but to disarm. The heavy rifle he was raising clattered to the ground in two neat pieces. A powerful, precise kick to his chest sent him flying backward, the air exploding from his lungs as he slammed into the quarry wall and slid to the ground, stunned and gasping. It was over in less than 3 seconds. 2 sentinels neutralized. They were still alive, their chests rising and falling, but they were no longer a threat. She stood over them for a moment, the hybrid creature silhouetted against the dark woods, a silent testament to their vulnerability. They thought their strength was in their pack, in their numbers. They were wrong. Their strength was a chain, and she had just broken the first 2 links. Now, for the alpha. She turned her gaze toward the rowdy, fire-lit clubhouse, and with the same impossible silence, melted back into the darkness. She slipped through the chaos of their camp like smoke through a keyhole. Her intimate knowledge of this land, every rock and ravine, was a far greater weapon than their crude fortifications. She had watched them for weeks, learning their rhythms, their habits. She knew the path worn into the dirt behind the clubhouse, leading to a cluster of sycamores they used as a latrine. It was a place of vulnerability, of indignity. It was perfect. Tucked into a crevice in the quarry wall, she waited. She was a statue of patient fury, her hybrid form letting her merge completely with the jagged shadows. The raucous noise from the clubhouse, shouting, laughter, the thump of heavy music, was a distant storm she ignored. Her senses were tuned for one thing, the heavy, confident footfalls of the one who had mocked her. A younger pack member stumbled out first, reeking of cheap whiskey. He relieved himself against a tree, muttering and unsteady on his feet, oblivious to the predator holding its breath just yards away. She let him pass. He was not the one. Her quarrel was not with the pack, but with its arrogant head. Minutes later, the door creaked open again. A large silhouette filled the frame, and a deep laugh echoed into the night before the door slammed shut. Jedediah Stone stepped into the clearing. He swaggered with the easy confidence of an alpha who believes his dominance is absolute. He was the one who had led the chorus of pathetic howls, the one who had turned her sacred cry into a joke. He walked toward the trees, his back to the quarry wall. Her wait was over. Every muscle in her lithe, powerful body coiled, her claws extending with a faint, scraping sound that was lost beneath the noise of the party. The man who played at being a monster was about to meet a real one. He was zipping his jeans when the primal instinct that had made him an alpha screamed a warning. It wasn't a sound or a scent. She had neither, but a sudden suffocating pressure, the feeling of a predator so close its very presence warped the air. Jed spun around, his own claws beginning to lengthen in a panic response. He was too slow. She was there, having moved across the rocky ground without a single whisper of sound. Her bipedal form was more terrifying up close than any legend could capture. She stood a full head taller than him, a being of whipcord muscle and shadow, but it was her eyes that locked him in place, freezing the half-formed snarl in his throat. They were luminous, intelligent orbs of cold, ancient starlight, and in their depths he saw his own wide-eyed terror reflected back. He had a horrifying final thought. This was not a beast. This was a reckoning. Before he could shout, before his body could fully commit to the change, she struck. Her hand, impossibly fast, clamped over his mouth and jaw, the force of it nearly shattering his teeth. Her strength was absolute, a living wall of power that made his own alpha might feel like a child's. an arm wrapped around his torso, and the needle-sharp tips of her claws dug into his side, a clear promise that any struggle would result in his immediate evisceration. Utterly silent, she began to move backward, dragging the powerful werewolf Alpha away from the light and into the deep, waiting darkness of her hollow. The muffled, frantic sounds of his struggle were swallowed by the woods. The man who had mocked the devil cat was now in her clutches, about to learn the true meaning of terror, far from the eyes and ears of his helpless pack. Deep within the hills, in a cavern carved by a forgotten river, she dropped him. He landed hard on the smooth, cold stone, the impact knocking the wind from him. The air here was ancient, still, and heavy with the scent of damp earth and ozone. Faint, phosphorescent moss grew in spidery veins across the high vaulted ceiling, casting the space in an eerie blue-green twilight. For a long moment, he just lay there, a broken heap. But the alpha in him, the core of a traditional werewolf's pride, refused to be extinguished. With a ragged groan, Jedediah Stone pushed himself up, first to his hands and knees, then staggering to his feet. Fear warred with fury on his face, his body twitching with the violent, aborted beginnings of the change. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a desperate attempt to reclaim some shred of his authority. She watched him from the shadows of the cave's entrance, her hybrid form a study in patient lethality. She had considered killing him, tearing the throat from the leader to terrify the rest. But she was a predator, not a butcher. She understood dynamics. Killing the alpha would dissolve the pack's rigid hierarchy, turning his followers from an organized nuisance into a chaotic swarm of vengeful hunters scouring her territory. It was inefficient. She didn't want a war. She wanted her home back.
"That sound you make," she said. Her voice was a low, guttural rasp, like stones grinding together, a voice unaccustomed to speech. "It is pathetic."
Jed flinched, the sound cutting through his rage.
"I let you live," she continued, taking a slow step forward into the faint light, her luminous eyes pinning him in place. "Not out of mercy, but because you are now my messenger." She let the statement hang in the dead air of the cave. "You will go back to your pack. You will tell them what you saw. You will gather your loud machines and your worthless trinkets. And you will leave my hills." She took another step, her presence overwhelming, suffocating. "If I see you, or any of your kind, after the next sunrise, I will not be this restrained. I will hunt you one by one, and this time I will not be silent."
The growl that echoed from her chest was the sound of rock shifting deep underground. It was a sound of immense pressure and ancient intolerance. Her head, a demonic silhouette of panther and ram, tilted slightly.
"Hold up, please. Perhaps we could make a deal."
"But deal?" Her voice was a dry rasp. "You are trespassing vermin. What could a wolf possibly possess that I would want?"
Jedediah forced himself to stand straighter, to meet those luminous, predatory eyes. He was terrified, but he was also a leader with a pack to protect. Cowering would get them all killed. "You want silence," he said, his voice strained but steady. "You want your territory clean. We can give you that, but we're not just here for the quarry. We're here because these hills are quiet, remote. We're hiding."
The devil cat let out a soft, guttural sound that might have been a laugh. An alpha. Hiding. The contempt in her voice was a physical force.
"Yes," Jed bit out, pushing past the insult. "From something far worse than a territorial dispute. Something that hunts your kind as easily as it hunts mine."
This gave her pause. The chilling stillness returned.
He pressed his advantage, seeing the flicker of change in her posture. "They're called the Wardens. Humans, but not just humans. They carry weapons that burn us from the inside out. They don't just kill, they cleanse. They leave nothing behind. No trace, no scent, no echo. We lost our entire West Coast chapter to them. 100 wolves, gone. The land they died on is just dead now. Nothing will grow."
He watched her, his heart hammering. He was gambling everything on this. The threat of a rival supernatural was one thing, but a force that could erase a creature from existence, leaving a void even in the earth? That was a threat to something as ancient and rooted as she was.
"You want us gone?" Jed asked, his voice dropping. Fine, we'll run right into their arms. And when they're done with us, they'll look at these quiet hills and wonder what other old things might be hiding in the shadows. They'll come looking, and their noise, their cleansing, will make our motorcycles sound like a lullaby. He let his proposal hang in the cold, silent air of the cave. Or, we can stay. We can be your sentinels, your buffer. We'll watch the roads and the towns. We'll deal with the humans. We will give you your silence, and in return, you give us sanctuary from the fire. That is my deal.
She stared at him, the dim, phosphorescent light of the cavern glinting in her predatory eyes. The truth of his words resonated in the air, a clean note she could not deny. She had sensed them, the strange, sterile energies that were not of the woods, not of her world. Fleeting ripples of power that felt wrong, like a string pulled too tight. But this man, this wolf, had stood before his pack and mocked her, defiled her sacred howl with his crude imitation. Her pride demanded retribution. A low growl, like the shifting of tectonic plates, escaped her lips. Jedediah flinched but held his ground. Her rational, ancient mind warred with the primal insult. Killing him was easy, but his offer presented a solution to a problem she hadn't yet fully defined. He wasn't just a trespasser. He was a potential buffer, an unwilling source of intelligence. Her growl subsided, replaced by a chilling silence that was somehow more menacing. She didn't strike him down.
Tell me more of these Wardens.
Relief, potent and dizzying, washed over Jed. He quickly suppressed it, knowing he was still on a knife's edge. They're not like us. They don't feel like a part of the world. They feel separate, he began, choosing his words carefully. They dress like professionals, not hunters. They move with this arrogant confidence, like they believe they own everything they see. He took a hesitant breath. Their weapons aren't lead and silver. It's magic. I've seen it. A friend of mine, an alpha from a pack up in the Rockies, got hit by a bolt of something from one of their hands. He didn't bleed. He just crystallized, turned to dust from the inside out. They talk about restoration and purity. They believe anyone who isn't like them is a form of corruption that needs to be cleansed.
She listened, her expression unreadable. He was describing the concord of houses, the arrogant arcanist mages who saw all other forms of supernatural life as heretical. They were a disease of order, and their presence here in her sanctuary was a far greater violation than a pack of noisy werewolves.
Finally, she spoke, her voice leaving no room for argument. Your deal is not accepted. Your life is not your own to bargain with. Here are my terms. She took a final, deliberate step toward him. You and your pack will remain. You will continue your disgusting noise. You will draw them here. You have made yourselves bait. When these Wardens come, I will see for myself if you have spoken the truth. If you have lied, she leaned closer, the words a low threat. I will unmake you all, so completely your ancestors will forget your names. If you're telling the truth, I will eliminate the threat. And then, your pack's fate is still mine to decide.
A ripple, like heat haze on a summer road, passed over her form. The monstrous, bipedal predator dissolved, folding in on itself. Bones shortened, horns receded into nothingness, and dark fur was replaced by pale skin. In a few silent, seamless moments, the nightmare was gone. In her place stood a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s, dressed in a simple black t-shirt, dark jeans, and scuffed black boots. The only hint of the creature she had been moments before was the ancient, cold authority that still burned in her dark eyes. Jedediah stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the lithe human woman before him with the terrifying being that had effortlessly overpowered him. The quiet, almost casual nature of the transformation was somehow more horrifying than the creature itself. It wasn't a painful, violent werewolf change. It was a simple, fluid shift, as easy as shrugging on a coat. It spoke of a mastery over her own form that was absolute. She tilted her head, a ghost of a smirk playing on her lips as she looked him up and down. The alpha wolf, now disheveled, humbled, and utterly terrified.
Let us get you back to your pack, Alpha, she said, the title dripping with a cold, mocking irony that stung more than any physical blow. She turned and began to walk toward the cave entrance. not once looking back, fully confident that he would have no choice but to follow.
The short walk from her inner sanctum to the cave's entrance was the longest of Jedediah's life. He hurried to keep up, his heavy boots echoing clumsily in the oppressive silence, a stark contrast to her own silent, fluid steps. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and something else, something he couldn't name. The terror was still there, a cold knot in his gut, but it was now mingled with a profound, instinctual awe. He had survived an encounter with a living nightmare, and in that moment of utter subjugation, he had seen something truly beautiful in its power. She moved with the same lethal grace in this human form, a predator wrapped in the guise of a young woman. He couldn't stop the words from tumbling out, clumsy and raw. "I'm sorry I mocked your voice." He stumbled over the sentence, the sound of his own voice shocking in the stillness. He sounded like a chastised pup, and he hated it, but the apology was genuine. She stopped dead. The sudden stillness was more jarring than a shout. She turned her head slowly, her dark eyes pinning him with an intensity that made the hair on his arms stand up. There was no acceptance in her gaze, no forgiveness. It was the sharp, analytical look of a hunter who had just seen its prey behave in an unexpected and therefore suspicious way. She was trying to figure out his angle, searching for the trick or the plea for pity hidden behind the apology. The silence stretched, thick with her unspoken skepticism. For a long moment, she stood there, so unnervingly still. Jed thought of her as a statue carved from night and stone, or perhaps more accurately, a panther coiled to pounce. The silence stretched, and he was certain he had made a fatal mistake, that his fumbling apology had been the final provocation. Just as he braced for an attack that would be too fast to see, she turned back and started to walk again, as if nothing had happened. Internally, her ancient mind processed the new input. This creature's apology was unexpected, a strange deviation from the snarling defiance he had shown in the cave. But it was not unwelcome. She didn't search for a hidden angle or a trick. She saw it in simpler, more primal terms. The inferior had acknowledged its transgression against the superior. It had been loud, it had been offensive, and now it knew it had messed up. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was not a smile of warmth, but of satisfaction. The quiet approval of a master whose unruly pet has finally learned its lesson. Perhaps they wouldn't be as bad of a nuisance now that their leader had been so thoroughly chastised. The first pale rays of sunlight were just beginning to crest the eastern ridge when they arrived back at the quarry entrance. She was tired, the long night's tension having taken its toll, but she had seen the task through, as was proper for a devil cat. The two new sentries guarding the path snapped to attention at the sight of her, their hands going to weapons she couldn't see. They relaxed instantly as Jed came into view behind her, his face pale and grim. He gave them a curt nod.
He stopped just before the makeshift gate and turned to her. "You are welcome to join us on any night you wish, you know."
She paused again, her body held in that unnerving stillness. What was this wolf playing at? Did he truly think inviting her to their loud gatherings with their roaring machines and the foul-smelling swill they drank would somehow sway her judgment or earn his pack leniency? The absurdity of it was baffling. He didn't wait for her reply. As if a switch had been flipped, the humbled captive vanished, and the alpha of the Howler's MC returned. Shoulders squared, he strode with renewed confidence past his sentries and toward the clubhouse, leaving her standing at the edge of his territory. She remained in view for a few more minutes, a silent silhouette against the burgeoning dawn, before turning and vanishing back into the deep woods. The wolf's bizarre invitation was forgotten, but his story lingered. A bit of curiosity had taken root in her ancient mind, a fascination with these strange, violent creatures who were not invaders, but refugees from a terrible fire-lit war. From her perch high on the quarry rim, she watched the pack. The boisterous, chaotic energy of the previous nights was gone, replaced by a quiet, purposeful industry. All evening, motorcycles had come and gone, not with roars of defiance, but with the low rumble of business. She saw them meeting with people from the surrounding Ozark towns, individuals whose families she had silently observed for generations. Money was exchanged, and small, discreet groups were then guided quickly and quietly through the winding back roads of her territory. 1. She recognized the pattern as criminal, a smuggling operation running through the heart of her domain. But the laws of humanity meant nothing to her. This was a matter of territorial integrity. She wondered if the wolf's invitation had been a ruse, a trap to lure her into their midst. All night, a part of her listened, waiting for the mocking howl that had so infuriated her, but it never came. The night remained quiet, disturbed only by the sound of their engines. The silence was a clear message. Her display of power had worked. The Alpha had delivered her warning, and the pack was now behaving. This new, respectful quiet changed her calculus. Why would they try to trap her now after making such a clear effort to appease her? A new thought began to form. These were not just loud trespassers. This was an organization, a system. They were not simply occupying her land. They were using it, moving things through it for a purpose she didn't yet understand. The curiosity that had sparked in the cave began to burn brighter. These were not just refugees. They were refugees with a business. And she needed to understand what that business was and how it connected to the Wardens who hunted them. Her initial fury had cooled, banked like embers under a layer of ash, replaced by the slow, steady burn of a hunter's curiosity. These wolves were more than just a noisy infestation. They were a piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle whose edges brushed up against the sterile wrongness of the Wardens. Their smuggling, their quiet movements, their hushed meetings with the locals. It all pointed to a network, a hidden layer of the world she had long ignored. To protect her hills, she had to understand the threats to it, and these refugees, these criminals, were now her most valuable, if unwilling, source of information. The hunt had not ended. It had simply changed. Her new prey was no longer the wolves themselves, but the truth that had driven them into her territory. And to catch it, she would have to do the unthinkable. She would have to get closer.
And so, this part of our tale comes to a close, but the veil is never truly shut. For more stories pulled from the shadows, like and subscribe. Until next time, remember, watch the shadows.